To understand the crime, you must first understand the woman. And Isabella Stewart Gardner was not a woman who could be easily understood. Born in New York in 1840 into wealth and privilege, Isabella could have lived the life expected of her. Marry well, host parties, collect appropriate hobbies, fade gracefully into the background of high society. But Isabella Stewart Gardner was not a woman who faded anywhere. She was a force, a scandal, a legend in her own time. She drank beer. She walked lions on leashes down Beacon Street. She wore a headband that spelled out the word "C'est mon plaisir" in diamonds, "It's my pleasure." When the Boston Symphony Orchestra premiered a new piece, she sat in the front row wearing a white dress with the words, "Oh, you Red Sox," stitched across the back in red letters. This was 1912. Proper Boston society was horrified. Isabella didn't care. But beneath the eccentricity, beneath the deliberate provocations, there was grief. Deep, consuming grief that shaped everything she would become. Her son Jackie died before his second birthday. The loss nearly destroyed her. Her husband, Jack Gardner, tried everything to pull her from the darkness. He took her traveling. Europe, Egypt, Asia, anywhere but Boston. Anywhere but the nursery that would forever be empty. The art saved her. Or perhaps more accurately, she discovered that art could be a vessel for everything she felt. The grief, the passion, the defiance, the joy that survived despite everything. In the galleries of Europe, standing before Rembrandts and Titians and Vermeers, she found a language for emotions she couldn't express any other way. She began to collect, not casually, not as a hobby, with obsession, with purpose, with a vision that was forming in her mind even as she stood in those foreign museums, something magnificent and impossible taking shape. When Jack died in 1898, Isabella was 60 years old. Many women of her era and class would have retreated, closed themselves off, lived quietly on their memories. Isabella did the opposite. She took the grief, the love, the losses, everything she'd accumulated in 6 decades of passionate living, and she poured it all into a building. Fenway Court, the official name of what we now call the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. But calling it a museum is like calling the ocean wet. Technically accurate, but missing the point entirely. Isabella designed it herself. A Venetian palazzo transported to Boston. 4 stories built around a central courtyard that would be filled with light and flowers and the sound of water from a fountain. Every room carefully planned, every placement deliberate. This wasn't a gallery. This was architecture as autobiography. This was a building that breathed her personality. She worked alongside the architects and contractors, oversaw every detail. The tiles imported from Italy, the balconies salvaged from actual Venetian palaces, the windows, the doorways, the staircases. Nothing was random. Nothing was merely decorative. Everything meant something. And then came the art, the collection she'd spent decades assembling. Rembrandt and Vermeer, Titian and Botticelli, Sargent and Whistler, Raphael and Michelangelo. Not just paintings, but sculptures, tapestries, furniture, books, letters, objects that spanned centuries and continents and cultures. But here's what made Isabella's vision unique. She didn't arrange the art by period or style or artist. She arranged it by feeling, by conversation, by the dialogues she wanted to create between objects separated by centuries. A Rembrandt portrait hung near a Chinese Buddha. A piece of Roman statuary faced a Gothic tapestry. Renaissance paintings shared walls with contemporary works. It was chaotic and brilliant, and deeply, profoundly personal. This was how Isabella saw the world, everything connected, everything in conversation, beauty transcending time and place and category. The Dutch room became the crown jewel. Here, she placed some of her most precious acquisitions. Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, his only seascape, showing Christ and the apostles in a boat battered by waves, the painting itself seeming to move with the motion of the storm. Rembrandt's A Lady and Gentleman in Black, a double portrait of a married couple, their faces luminous against the darkness, and a tiny self-portrait, Rembrandt's own face etched onto a small piece of copper, hung so you had to lean in close to see the details. And then, most precious of all, Vermeer's The Concert. 3 figures making music, a woman at a keyboard, a man singing, another woman listening, light pouring through an unseen window, illuminating the scene with that particular Vermeer magic that no other painter has ever quite captured, the quiet intensity of the moment, the sense that you're witnessing something private, something sacred. Only 34 paintings by Vermeer exist in the world. Isabella owned one, and she placed it where she could see it from multiple angles, where it would catch the light at different times of day, where it would anchor the entire room. The museum opened on New Year's Day 1903. Isabella threw a party. Music, champagne, guests from across the country. She stood at the entrance greeting everyone, wearing her diamonds, her personality filling the space as much as the art. People wandered through in wonder. Some were confused by the unconventional arrangements. Others were moved to tears. This was Isabella's gift to the world, her autobiography written in objects, her grief and joy made tangible, her life's work. But she was also possessive, fiercely protective. This wasn't just a collection, this was her soul made visible, and she wanted it preserved exactly as she'd created it. Her will was explicit, unambiguous. The collection must remain in this building. Nothing could be sold, nothing could be loaned out, and critically, nothing could be moved. Not a painting, not a chair, not a vase. Everything must stay exactly where she'd placed it. Forever. If these terms were violated, the entire collection would be sold and the money given to Harvard University. The museum would cease to exist. It was an impossible condition, a demand that locked the museum in time. But it was also a final act of control. Isabella had spent her life defying expectations, and she would defy death itself by ensuring her vision remained untouched. She died in 1924, and for 66 years, her wishes were honored. The museum remained exactly as she'd left it, a time capsule, a shrine, a palace of art frozen at the moment of its creator's death. The security was modest. Why would it need to be anything else? This was a museum, not a bank. The art couldn't be sold on the open market. The pieces were too famous, too recognizable. Who would steal something that could never be sold? There were guards, of course, a basic alarm system, cameras in some locations, but nothing elaborate. Nothing that anticipated a serious professional heist, because the assumption was simple. No one would dare. No one would violate Isabella's sacred space. No one would be so audacious, so reckless, so brazenly criminal as to invade this palazzo and steal pieces that had been placed with such care, such intention, such love. That assumption was wrong. On March 18, 1990, two men in police uniforms would walk through the side door of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and in 81 minutes, they would shatter Isabella's vision. They would violate her final wish. They would rip paintings from walls and leave empty frames as monuments to theft. They would commit the largest art heist in history, and they would leave behind a mystery that has haunted the art world for over 3 decades. The palace of a passionate soul would become a crime scene, and the empty frames would become ghosts. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, we need to talk about the night it happened. The cold March night when beauty became a victim, when 2 young guards made a decision that would change everything, when the thieves came calling. March 18th, 1990. St. Patrick's Day had just ended. Boston was winding down from the celebrations, the parades, the drinking, the chaos that comes with the holiday in a city where Irish heritage runs deep. The streets were quieter now, past midnight, moving into the early hours of Sunday morning. At the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, the night shift had begun. 2 guards were on duty. Rick Abath, 23 years old, a musician and aspiring artist working the security job to pay bills, and Randy Hestand, the second guard, slightly older, more experienced, but still young, still underpaid, still viewing this as just another shift in a long string of shifts. The museum at night was a different place. The visitors were gone, the lights were dimmed. The art sat in semi-darkness, the faces in the portraits seeming to watch from the shadows. It was peaceful, quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you forget, just for a moment, that you're responsible for protecting hundreds of millions of dollars worth of irreplaceable art. Rick Abath was stationed in the security office, a small room, cramped, dominated by a desk and a wall of monitors showing feeds from the various security cameras throughout the building. Not every room was covered, not every angle, but enough to give a sense of the museum's layout, to alert the guards if something was wrong. The procedure was simple. Walk the rounds, check the doors, watch the monitors, stay alert, don't fall asleep, don't leave your post. And above all, follow protocol. If anyone tried to enter after hours, don't let them in. Call the police. Let the professionals handle it. But protocol assumes normal circumstances. It assumes typical threats. It doesn't account for what walked up to the museum's side entrance at 1:24 a.m. on that Sunday morning. Rick Abath was making his rounds when the buzzer sounded. Someone at the side door. He walked to the security desk and looked at the monitor showing the exterior camera feed. Two men stood outside. Dark uniforms, caps, the unmistakable silhouette of police officers. One of them pressed the intercom button. "Boston Police," the voice said. Calm, official, the tone of authority that doesn't expect to be questioned. "We got a call about a disturbance. Need to check it out." Rick Abath hesitated. This wasn't protocol. After-hours entry required clearance, verification, procedure. But these were police officers, in uniform, responding to a call, and it was St. Patrick's Day weekend. Disturbances were common. Maybe someone had reported something. Maybe there'd been an incident nearby and they were doing a sweep. The decision took seconds. Seconds that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He pressed the buzzer, released the lock, opened the door. The two men walked in, professional, unhurried. One was taller, heavier, with a moustache. The other was shorter, leaner, more wiry. Both wore what looked like legitimate Boston police uniforms. Dark pants, light blue shirts, badges, caps. Everything correct except for one detail that Abath wouldn't notice until much later. The uniforms were slightly wrong. The shade of blue a bit off. The badges not quite right. Close enough to pass a quick glance, but not close enough to fool someone who knew what to look for. But in the moment, in the dim light of the museum entrance, with the authority of the uniforms and the confidence in their voices, Abath didn't see the discrepancies. He saw police officers, he saw authority, and he complied. "Where's your partner?" one of them asked. "Making rounds," Abath said. "Upstairs. Call him down." Abath used the radio. Hestand responded, came down the stairs, confused about why police were in the museum but not alarmed. Not yet. And then the trap closed. "Gentlemen," the taller officer said, his voice still calm, still professional. "We have a warrant for your arrest. There's a problem. Step away from the desk." It didn't make sense. Arrested? For what? But the authority in the voice, the presence of the uniforms, the sheer audacity of the statement, paralyzed thought. This was a police officer making a statement of fact. You don't argue with police officers. Abath stepped away from the desk, away from the panic button, away from the only alarm that could have brought real help. That small step was the final mistake, the last moment where the night could have gone differently. The shorter man moved quickly, produced handcuffs, not police-issue handcuffs, but close enough. He cuffed Abath's hands behind his back. The taller man did the same to Hestand, professional, practiced, no hesitation, no violence, just smooth, efficient control. "This is a robbery," the taller man said. His voice didn't change, still calm, still measured, as if he were explaining something mundane, something ordinary. "If you cooperate, you won't get hurt. If you give us any problems, we'll put a bullet in your head." The words landed like blows. This wasn't police, this was something else, something worse. And the realization came too late to matter. The thieves produced duct tape, grey industrial-strength tape. They wrapped it around the guards' heads, covering their eyes, their mouths. Not tight enough to suffocate, but enough to blind, to silence, to control. Then they led the guards, stumbling, unable to see, down the stairs into the basement. The basement of the Gardner Museum was not a place meant for visitors. It was utilitarian, concrete, cold. Pipes ran along the ceiling. Old maintenance equipment gathered dust in corners. The thieves handcuffed each guard to a separate water pipe, securing them in different areas so they couldn't communicate, couldn't help each other, couldn't plan. "Don't move," one of the thieves said. "Don't make noise. We'll be watching. If you try anything, we'll know." Then the footsteps receded, the door closed, and the guards were left in darkness, bound, terrified, listening to the muffled sounds of movement above them, the sounds of a crime unfolding, the sounds of beauty being violated. The thieves had control of the museum. They had the master keys, taken from the security desk. They had time. And they had a plan. Or at least, they had the beginning of a plan. What they did next would baffle investigators for decades. They moved through the museum not like professional art thieves, but like men operating from a shopping list they didn't fully understand. Their first stop was the Dutch room, the crown jewel, the room Isabella had designed to showcase her most precious acquisitions. The room was dark, illuminated only by emergency lighting and whatever flashlights the thieves had brought. The paintings hung on the walls, silent witnesses to their own violation, and the thieves went to work. They didn't bring proper tools, no specialized equipment for removing art, no materials to protect the canvases. They brought a knife, just a knife, and they used it with brutal efficiency and complete disregard for the art itself. Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, the only seascape the master ever painted, a canvas measuring over 5 feet wide, showing Christ and his disciples in a boat, battered by waves, the water alive with motion, the faces of the men showing fear and faith in equal measure. The painting had hung in this room for decades, carefully preserved, lovingly mandated. The thief took his knife and cut, not carefully, not with precision, just cut. The blade sliced through centuries-old canvas, separating the painting from its frame. The frame stayed on the wall, heavy, ornate, gilded, worth thousands of dollars itself. But the thief didn't care about the frame. He only wanted what was inside. He rolled the canvas, roughly, carelessly, and moved to the next piece. Rembrandt's A Lady and Gentleman in Black. Another masterwork, a double portrait, the faces luminous against the dark background. The clothing rendered in exquisite detail, every fold of fabric showing the artist's genius. Cut from the frame, rolled, treated like a poster bought at a college bookstore, the small Rembrandt self-portrait etched onto copper. Too small to cut, too valuable to leave. They unscrewed it from the wall, damaging the plaster, leaving marks that would remain long after the painting was gone. And then, most devastating of all, Vermeer's The Concert. One of only 34 known Vermeers in existence. 3 figures making music, light pouring across the scene. That ineffable Vermeer quality, that sense of capturing a moment so perfectly that you can almost hear the music, almost feel the presence of the people in the room. The most valuable painting in the collection. Perhaps the most valuable stolen object in the world. Cut from the frame. Rolled. Gone. But they weren't done. They moved to other rooms, the short gallery, the blue room. And here their choices became bizarre, inexplicable. The mark not of professionals, but of amateurs working from instructions they didn't fully understand. In the short gallery, they ignored a priceless Titian landscape, passed right by it. Instead, they took a small Chinese bronze beaker, Shang Dynasty, over 3,000 years old, worth money certainly, but nothing compared to the paintings they could have taken. Why? What made that beaker valuable to them? They also took a bronze eagle finial, a Napoleonic flag ornament that had been glued to the top of a flagpole. It wasn't even a standalone piece. It was decorative hardware, and they ripped it off, damaging the flag in the process, and took it, as if someone had told them, "Take the eagle," and they'd simply followed orders without understanding why. In the blue room, they attempted to take Manet's Chez Tortoni, a small painting, intimate, showing a man at a cafe. They got it off the wall, but then, for some reason, left it on a desk. Tried to remove it from its frame and failed. Just left it there, as if they'd run out of time or patience or understanding. They also took several Degas drawings, small sketches, valuable, yes, but odd choices given what they'd passed over, given what they'd left behind. 5 Degas drawings when there were larger, more famous works hanging nearby. 81 minutes. That's how long they spent inside the museum. Not the quick smash and grab of typical art thieves, not the carefully timed precision of professionals. 81 minutes wandering through the museum, selecting pieces, rejecting others, making choices that made no sense. At some point during those 81 minutes, they returned to the security office, found the video recorder that had captured their entry, smashed it. Not stolen, smashed, destroying the tapes that showed their faces, their entry, their initial interaction with the guards. But they missed some of the motion detectors. missed some of the other recording equipment. Their attempt to erase themselves was incomplete, sloppy. And then, at approximately 2:45 a.m., they were done. 13 objects total, 3 Rembrandts, 1 Vermeer, 1 Manet, 5 Degas, a Chinese bronze, a Napoleonic eagle, an odd, eclectic, baffling collection that suggested either genius-level misdirection or simple confusion. They walked out the same side door they'd entered, got into their car, which had been waiting outside the entire time, and drove away into the Boston night, taking with them $500 million in art, leaving behind 2 terrified guards, a shattered security system, and empty frames that would haunt the art world for decades. The guards remained handcuffed in the basement for hours, unable to move, unable to call for help, listening to the silence above them and wondering if the thieves would return, wondering if they'd be killed as witnesses, wondering if anyone would ever find them. It wasn't until after 8 a.m., when the day shift arrived and found the security office abandoned, the front door still locked from the inside, that the alarm was finally raised. Police were called, the museum was searched, and the guards were found, still cuffed to the pipes, still blindfolded, traumatized but alive. The discovery of what had been taken came slowly, room by room, frame by frame, the empty spaces on the walls telling the story, the Dutch room devastated, the short gallery violated, the blue room ransacked. Isabella Stewart Gardner's palace of art had been invaded, her final wishes had been shattered, and 13 pieces of her soul had been stolen into the night. The investigation would begin immediately, but the art and the thieves who took it had vanished completely, as if they'd never existed at all, as if the whole night had been a nightmare that left behind only empty frames and unanswered questions. The sun rose over Boston on March 18, 1990, illuminating a crime scene. Police cars surrounded the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Investigators moved through the galleries with careful precision, documenting everything. Photographers captured the devastation. Forensic teams dusted for prints. And slowly, painfully, the full scope of the theft became clear. 13 objects, gone. But to call them objects is to miss the point entirely. These weren't things, they were conversations frozen in time. Moments of human genius captured on canvas and bronze and paper. And now they were gone, replaced by silence and empty frames, and a void that seemed to expand with each passing hour. Let's talk about what was stolen. Not just the names and the estimated values, but what these pieces meant, what they represented, what was lost when they vanished into the night. Start with Rembrandt. Rembrandt Harmens Zoon van Rijn, born in 1606 in Leiden, Netherlands, died in 1669 in Amsterdam, one of the greatest painters who ever lived, master of light and shadow, genius of human emotion. His work doesn't just show you what people looked like, it shows you who they were, the weight they carried, the light that lived inside them despite the darkness. The Storm on the Sea of Galilee was painted in 1633. Rembrandt was 27 years old, newly married, at the height of his powers. The painting shows a biblical scene, Christ and his disciples in a boat during a violent storm. The sea is alive, waves towering, the boat tilting dangerously. Some of the disciples are terrified, clutching the rigging, their faces showing raw fear. Others are struggling with the sail, fighting to keep the boat afloat. And Christ sits calmly in the stern, about to rebuke the storm, about to demonstrate his power over nature itself. But here's what makes it extraordinary. Rembrandt painted himself into the scene. One of the figures in the boat, looking directly out at the viewer, is Rembrandt himself. He placed himself in the storm, made himself a witness to the miracle. It's a painting about faith, about fear, about the human response to forces beyond our control. The canvas measured 63 inches by 50 inches, over 5 feet of painted genius, and it was the only seascape Rembrandt ever created, the only time he painted the ocean, the only time he tackled this particular biblical story in this particular way. That singularity made it irreplaceable, not in monetary terms, though those were staggering, but in historical terms. There is no other painting like it. There will never be another painting like it. The thief cut it from its frame with a knife, sliced through the canvas like it was a poster. The edges were left ragged, torn. The painting was rolled roughly, carelessly. Every art conservator who learned the details felt physically sick. Rolling a canvas that old, that fragile, could cause the paint to crack, to flake, to fall away in pieces. The painting might have been destroyed in the very act of stealing it. A Lady and Gentleman in Black was painted in 1633 as well. A double portrait. A married couple, their names lost to history, dressed in the formal black clothing of Dutch merchants. Their faces emerge from darkness, lit with Rembrandt's characteristic use of light. The woman's face is serene, intelligent. The man looks directly at the viewer with an expression that's hard to define. Confidence mixed with something softer. Vulnerability, perhaps. Humanity. This painting was cut from its frame the same way, brutally, carelessly. Another masterwork treated like trash. And then the small self-portrait, just 5 inches by 4 inches. Tiny. Rembrandt's face etched onto a piece of copper. He painted himself throughout his life, dozens of self-portraits, tracking his aging, his changing fortune, his relationship with his own image. This particular one showed him young, confident, meeting the viewer's eyes with directness.
It was mounted in a wooden backing screwed into the wall.
The thieves unscrewed it, damaging the plaster, leaving gouges, but at least they didn't cut it. At least copper can't be rolled and cracked like canvas. 3 Rembrandts. Gone. But the real devastation, the piece that art historians wept over, was the Vermeer. Johannes Vermeer, born in Delft, Netherlands in 1632, died in 1675, relatively unknown, leaving behind debts and 34 paintings. 34 in his entire life. Compare that to Rembrandt's hundreds, to Picasso's thousands. Vermeer worked slowly, meticulously, creating small, intimate scenes of domestic life with a mastery of light that has never been equaled. The concert was painted around 1664. It shows 3 people in a room. A woman sits at a keyboard, a virginal, a type of harpsichord. A man stands beside her, holding a piece of paper, probably sheet music, singing. Another woman sits with her back to the viewer, listening. The light comes from the left, from a window we can't see, bathing the scene in that golden, crystalline Vermeer glow. It's quiet, intimate, the kind of moment that happens in private, that usually goes unwitnessed and unrecorded. 3 people making music together. Nothing dramatic, nothing grand, just human beings connecting through art, through sound, through shared experience. But the way Vermeer painted it transforms the ordinary into the transcendent. The light seems to vibrate. The colors are impossibly rich. The blue of the woman's dress, the yellow of the chairs, the red of the rug on the table. Every surface has texture and weight and presence. You can almost hear the music. You can almost feel the air in the room. Of the 34 known Vermeers, only a handful are in private collections or museums that allow close study. The concert was one of them. Scholars came from around the world to study it, to try to understand Vermeer's technique, his use of light, his compositional genius.
It was a treasure not just for the Gardner Museum, but for humanity.
A window into 17th century Dutch life, a masterclass in painting, a moment of beauty preserved for centuries. And now it was gone, cut from its frame, rolled, vanished. The estimated value when insurance companies and art experts tried to put a number on it was $200 million. Some said higher, some said it was priceless, that no amount of money could truly capture its worth. It became, overnight, the most valuable stolen object in the world, a title it still holds today. But the thieves didn't stop with the masterpieces. They took other things, stranger things, things that made investigators question whether they were dealing with professionals or rank amateurs. From the Short Gallery, they took a Chinese bronze beaker, Gu vessel, Shang dynasty, somewhere between 1200 and 1100 BC, over 3,000 years old, bronze with a green patina, decorated with stylized designs, worth perhaps $100,000, a significant piece of ancient art, certainly. But they'd walked past a Titian to get to it, walked past a painting worth tens of millions to steal a bronze worth a fraction of that. Why? Did they know something about the bronze that made it particularly valuable? Was it easier to carry? Was it on a list given to them by whoever hired them? Or did they simply grab it on impulse,
attracted by its age, its strangeness, its otherness. The Napoleonic eagle made even less sense. It was a finial, an ornamental piece that had topped a flagpole. Napoleon's imperial guard had carried it into battle. It had historical significance, certainly, but it wasn't a standalone artwork. It was a piece of military hardware, gilded bronze, maybe 8 inches tall, and it was glued to the flagpole. The thieves ripped it off, tore it away, damaging the silk flag in the process. The flag itself, a genuine Napoleonic artifact, was probably worth more than the eagle.
But they left the flag and took the eagle, as if someone had said, "Get the eagle," and they'd followed orders without understanding context or value or reason. Edouard Manet's Chez Tortoni, a small painting, about 10 inches by 12 inches, painted around 1875, shows a man at a cafe, wearing a top hat, a distant look in his eyes. It's intimate, immediate, capturing a moment of solitude in a public space. Manet was a master, a revolutionary who helped birth Impressionism. Any work by him is valuable. But the thieves botched it. They got it off the wall but couldn't get it out of the frame properly. They left it sitting on a desk in the blue room, partially extracted, abandoned, as if they'd run out of time or patience, or as if they realized they'd made a mistake and decided to cut their losses. And then the Degas drawings, 5 of them. Edgar Degas, the French impressionist famous for his paintings of ballet dancers, of horses, of Parisian life. These were sketches, studies, smaller works, each valuable. Genuine Degas drawings could fetch hundreds of thousands or even millions at auction. But again, strange choices. They took some Degas but not others, took drawings but not paintings. The selection seemed arbitrary. One of the sketches was barely 6 inches by 4 inches. Program for an Artistic Soirée, it was called. A simple drawing, almost a doodle, showing figures at a performance. Why take something so small, so relatively minor, when larger, more famous Degas works were nearby? The pattern that emerged from analyzing the thefts was contradictory. On one hand, they targeted some of the museum's crown jewels, the Rembrandt seascape, the Vermeer, significant pieces by major artists. On the other hand, they'd made baffling choices, ignoring more valuable works, taking odd items that didn't fit any logical pattern of professional art theft. Investigators developed theories. Maybe the thieves were working from a list provided by whoever hired them. A collector with specific tastes, specific desires. But if so, why include the Napoleonic eagle? Why the Chinese bronze? What kind of collector wanted those pieces alongside Rembrandt and Vermeer? Maybe the thieves were supposed to take more but ran out of time. 81 minutes sounds like a lot, but in a museum with thousands of objects, with multiple floors and rooms, maybe they simply couldn't accomplish everything they'd planned. Maybe the Manet left on the desk was evidence of panic, of realizing they'd been inside too long, that dawn was approaching, that they needed to leave. Or maybe they were just amateurs. Maybe they'd been hired to steal valuable art, and they grabbed what looked old, what looked important, what fit the vague instructions they'd been given. The empty frame left behind, the damaged flag, the abandoned Manet, all evidence of people who didn't really know what they were doing. But then, how did they know about the museum's security? How did they know which door to approach? How did they have police uniforms that were close enough to pass initial inspection? How did they maintain such control over the guards, such confidence throughout the theft? The contradictions were maddening. Professional enough to gain entry, to control the guards, to disable some of the security systems. Amateur enough to make bizarre choices, to damage priceless art, to leave obvious evidence behind. The museum staff, when they were finally allowed back into the building after the initial police investigation, walked through the galleries in a state of shock. The empty frames had been left on the walls. Per Isabella's will, nothing could be moved. So there they hung, massive, ornate, gilded rectangles surrounding nothing. The ghosts of paintings, the shadows of beauty. Anne Hawley, the museum's director, stood in the Dutch room and wept. She dedicated her life to this institution, to preserving Isabella's vision. And now that vision was shattered. 3 empty frames on one wall alone. The Rembrandt seascape? Gone. The Vermeer? Gone. The room felt violated, hollowed out, incomplete. The decision was made almost immediately. The frames would stay empty. They would not be filled with other art. They would not be removed to hide the evidence of theft. They would remain exactly where Isabella had placed them, where the stolen paintings had hung for decades. They would become a memorial, a reminder, a call for the art's return. Visitors to the museum, in the days and weeks and years that followed, would stand before those empty frames and feel something that numbers and values couldn't capture. Loss, absence, the specific aching void left when beauty is stolen. The frames became more powerful than many complete artworks. They forced you to imagine what was missing, to feel the negative space, to understand that art isn't just about what's present, but about what's absent. The investigation into who had taken the art, and why and where it had gone, would consume decades. But the investigation into what had been lost started immediately. And what had been lost was more than canvas and paint and bronze. What had been lost was irreplaceable. 13 objects, $500 million. Those were the numbers that made headlines. But the real loss was harder to quantify. It was the loss of access, the loss of scholarship, the loss of the experience of standing before a Vermeer and feeling that particular quality of light, that sense of time stopping, that moment of connection across centuries. Future generations would never see the concert in person. Students of art history would study it only through photographs, through reproductions that could never capture the subtleties of Vermeer's brushwork, the luminosity of his colors, the magic of his light. The painting had been kidnapped from the world, hidden away, locked in darkness, its beauty seen by no one. That was the real crime, not the theft of property. The theft of experience, the theft of beauty, the theft of those moments when art reaches across time and touches something inside us, reminds us of our shared humanity, shows us what we're capable of creating. The thieves took 13 objects, but what they really stole was the conversation, the dialogue between past and present, the connection between Isabella's vision and everyone who came after her, seeking beauty, seeking meaning, seeking that moment of transcendence that only art can provide. And they left behind empty frames, silent, accusatory, eternal, waiting for a return that might never come. The investigation would chase leads across continents, through criminal underworlds, into the darkest corners of the illegal art trade. But the frames would remain empty, the void would remain unfilled, and the loss would echo through the art world for decades, a wound that refused to heal, a mystery that refused to be solved. The paintings were gone, but their absence was everywhere. 35 years. That's how long the paintings have been gone as of 2025. 35 years of absence. 35 years of empty frames. 35 years of searching and hoping and coming up empty. An entire generation has grown up never having seen the concert in person. Art students who studied Vermeer in school, who wrote papers about his use of light, his compositional genius, his mysterious technique, have only seen photographs, reproductions, digital images on screens. They've never stood before the actual painting, never experienced that particular quality of presence that only original art possesses. The same is true for Rembrandt's Seascape, for the double portrait, for all 13 stolen pieces. They've been removed from the world, locked away in darkness, hidden from the eyes they were meant to delight. And every day they remain hidden, the loss becomes more profound. Because art isn't meant to be possessed, not really. Yes, collectors buy it, own it legally, have the right to display it or hide it as they choose, but great art transcends ownership. It belongs to everyone who sees it, everyone who's moved by it, everyone who finds meaning in the dialogue between their own life and the life captured on canvas centuries ago. The Gardner thieves didn't just steal from the museum, they stole from every person who would have stood before those paintings in the years since 1990. Students, scholars, tourists, art lovers, people seeking beauty, seeking connection, seeking that moment when time stops and you're transported into another world, another way of seeing. Millions of people have been robbed of that experience, and they'll never get it back. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum continues to operate, continues to welcome visitors, continues to honor Isabella's vision as much as possible given what was taken. The courtyard still blooms with flowers, the galleries still showcase the remaining collection,
Music still echoes through the tapestry room.
Life continues, but the empty frames dominate every conversation. They're what people remember, what they photograph, what they post on social media with captions about loss and mystery and unfinished stories. The museum made a deliberate choice to leave the frames empty. They could have filled them with other art, could have borrowed pieces from other museums, rotated the collection, created new displays. But that would have violated Isabella's will. Her instruction was clear. Nothing could be moved, nothing could be changed. The collection must remain exactly as she left it. So the frames stayed empty. And in doing so, they became something more powerful than any replacement could have been. They became memorials, monuments, warnings, and strangely, they became art in themselves. Think about it. An empty frame on a wall forces you to see absence as presence, to confront the void, to imagine what's missing. Your mind fills in the space, reconstructs the painting from memory or photographs or pure imagination. You become a participant in the loss, an active witness to the crime. It's the opposite of what Isabella intended. She wanted every viewer to have a direct, unmediated experience with art, to stand before a Rembrandt and feel what she felt, to see what she saw, to enter into the conversation she'd carefully orchestrated between pieces from different centuries and cultures. Instead, visitors now have an experience with absence, with the ghost of art, with the hole left behind when beauty is stolen. It's not what Isabella wanted, but it's powerful nonetheless, in its own terrible way. The empty frames might be the most affecting part of the entire museum. They force you to confront fundamental questions. What is art worth? Not in dollars, but in human terms, in the value of experience, of beauty, of connection across time. What do we lose when art is hidden away? What does it mean to steal not just an object, but the possibility of seeing that object, of being moved by it, of having your life changed by it? The thieves probably never thought about these questions. They were criminals, executing a job, stealing property that could be converted into money or leverage or freedom. They saw paintings, not beauty, saw canvas and frames, not conversations across centuries. They were blind to what they were really taking. Or maybe they weren't. Maybe they understood perfectly well. Maybe that was part of the thrill. Not just the monetary value, but the cultural value. The power of taking something that could never be replaced, that belonged to the world, and hiding it away where no one could find it. That kind of theft is different from stealing jewelry or cash. Those things can be replaced. New jewelry can be made, new money printed. But there will never be another storm on the Sea of Galilee. Rembrandt is dead. That moment of creation, when he put brush to canvas and captured the storm and the fear and the faith, is gone forever. The painting is all that remains. And now even the painting is gone. The loss is permanent, absolute. Even if the paintings are recovered tomorrow, the 35 years of absence can't be undone. The millions of people who might have seen them but didn't. The scholars who might have studied them but couldn't. The restoration and conservation work that should have been done but wasn't. All of that is lost forever. And there's a very real possibility the paintings will never be recovered. That they've been destroyed, deliberately or through neglect. That they're sitting in a warehouse or storage unit somewhere, rolled up, deteriorating, the paint cracking and flaking away. Or that they were burned years ago when whoever was holding them realized they could never be sold, never be displayed, never be converted into anything useful. Art theft is fundamentally irrational. Stealing famous art is like stealing the Mona Lisa. Sure, it's worth hundreds of millions, but you can never sell it. Can never show it to anyone. Can never do anything with it, except hide it and hope you don't get caught. It's worthless as loot. Its only value is as leverage, and even that is limited. Most governments won't negotiate with art thieves. Most museums can't pay ransoms. So why do it? Why steal art that can never be sold? Sometimes it's commissioned. A wealthy, unscrupulous collector who wants a private viewing of a masterpiece. Ethics be damned. These collectors exist, though they're rare. They have the money to buy stolen art and the discretion to keep it hidden. But even they are limited by paranoia. You can't show your stolen Vermeer to guests, can't have it appraised, can't insure it,
can't do anything that might alert authorities. It's a lonely kind of ownership. Sometimes it's leverage, as the FBI believes was the case with the Gardner heist. Steal the art, hold it as collateral, trade it for something more immediately useful. But that only works if someone is willing to trade. And increasingly, law enforcement agencies won't make those deals, won't reduce sentences or grant immunity in exchange for art. The policy is simple: we don't negotiate with art thieves. So the art sits in limbo, too valuable to destroy, too hot to sell, too dangerous to use. A burden to whoever holds it. A ticking time bomb that could bring down an entire criminal organization if discovered. That's probably where the Gardner paintings are right now, sitting in some climate-controlled storage unit or basement, wrapped in cloth, hidden away, waiting. The person who has them might want to return them, might be desperate to get rid of them, but doing so means risking arrest, prosecution, imprisonment. So they wait, and the paintings wait with them, and the years pass. The museum has made it clear they want the art back, no questions asked. They're willing to grant immunity to whoever returns it.
The FBI has signaled they might be flexible on prosecution if it means recovering the paintings. The $10 million reward is real, substantial, life-changing, but still, nothing. 35 years of silence. The case has become a cultural touchstone. Books have been written about it, dozens of them, each offering new theories, new suspects, new possible solutions. Documentaries appear regularly, rehashing the same evidence, interviewing the same experts, reaching the same dead ends. Podcasts, dedicated to unsolved mysteries, always include an episode about the Gardner heist. It's become a puzzle that everyone wants to solve. Amateur detectives spend hours online, debating theories, analyzing evidence, convinced they've found the key that professional investigators missed. Some of these amateur sleuths are brilliant, dedicated, thorough. Some are obsessed to the point of delusion, seeing connections that don't exist, building elaborate conspiracy theories that collapse under scrutiny. But they all share the same impulse: the need to solve the unsolvable, to find the answer that's eluded everyone else, to be the one who brings the paintings home. It's a noble impulse, but it's also revealing. What is it about this particular crime that captures the imagination so completely? Why does the Gardner heist fascinate in ways that other, arguably more serious crimes don't? Part of it is the mystery, the 81 minutes that changed everything, the bizarre selection of pieces, the odd behavior of the thieves, the decades of dead ends and tantalizing leads that go nowhere. It's a puzzle with missing pieces, a story without an ending. Part of it is the value. $500 million is an incomprehensible amount, the kind of number that makes headlines, that captures attention, that turns a crime into a spectacle. But mostly, it's the loss. The empty frames that hang in the museum, silent witnesses to a crime against beauty, the knowledge that somewhere, hidden away, are masterpieces that belong to the world but can't be seen by anyone. It's tragic in a way that bank robberies and jewelry heists aren't. Those crimes are about money, about property. The Gardner heist was about art, about beauty, about the human need to create and preserve and share things that transcend mere value. Isabella Stewart Gardner spent her life building something magnificent, a palace of art that would outlive her, that would continue to inspire and delight and educate long after she was gone. She poured her grief and her passion and her fortune into creating a space where people could encounter beauty, could step outside their daily lives and into something transcendent. And on March 18, 1990, two men in fake police uniforms walked into that space and tore it apart. Not out of hatred or ideology or any comprehensible motive, just for money, for leverage, for criminal calculation that saw paintings not as art but as commodities. They succeeded beyond anything they could have anticipated. Not in getting away with the money, the art has never been monetized, never been sold, never brought them the riches they might have imagined, but in creating a permanent wound, a loss that can't be healed, a mystery that's consumed decades and shows no signs of being solved. The empty frames hang in the Dutch room, in the short gallery, in the blue room. They hang exactly where Isabella placed the paintings that once filled them, and they'll continue to hang there, according to her will, forever, or at least until the paintings come home. If the paintings come home, 35 years is a long time, long enough for everyone directly involved in the theft to have died.
long enough for the trail to have gone completely cold, long enough for hope to fade, from expectation to wish to prayer. But the museum hasn't given up. The FBI hasn't closed the case. The $10 million reward still stands. And people around the world still care, still hope.
Still believe that somehow, someday, the paintings will be recovered, because the alternative is too painful to accept. The alternative is that beauty has been lost forever, that Vermeer's light will never again illuminate a gallery, that Rembrandt's storm will never again move a viewer to tears, that 13 pieces of human genius have been erased from the world, hidden away in darkness, destroyed by time and neglect and criminal indifference. The alternative is that the thieves won completely, not just in evading capture, but in succeeding in their theft of something that was never really theirs to steal. They stole the experience of art. They stole the future. They stole from every person who will never get to stand before those paintings and feel what Isabella felt when she first saw them, what she wanted everyone to feel. That's the real crime, not the violation of property rights or museum security, the violation of the human right to beauty, to art, to the conversations across centuries that make us feel less alone, more connected, more fully human. The Gardner heist isn't just the story of a theft, it's the story of what we lose when beauty is stolen, what we lose when art is treated as commodity rather than miracle, what we lose when the empty frames on the wall become more famous than the paintings that once hung there. Stand in the Dutch room of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Look at the empty frames. Feel the weight of their absence. And understand that you're looking at more than empty space. You're looking at a crime that's still happening. Every day those paintings remain hidden is another day of loss, another day of theft, another day when the world is diminished by their absence. The story doesn't have an ending yet. Maybe it never will. Maybe the paintings are gone forever, destroyed or hidden so well they'll never be found. Maybe they'll surface tomorrow, returned by someone seeking redemption or reward, or just the peace that comes from letting go of a terrible burden. We don't know. We can't know. We can only wait and hope and keep those empty frames hanging on the walls as reminders of what we've lost and what we're still searching for. Isabella Stewart Gardner created a palace of art to house beauty. The thieves turned it into a museum of absence, and that absence has its own power, its own message, its own terrible beauty. The paintings are gone, but the loss remains, permanent, aching, impossible to fill. And perhaps that's the most fitting memorial to the crime. Not closure, not resolution, not even justice, just the eternal presence of absence, the ghost of beauty, the silence where conversation used to be. The empty frames hang waiting, and the world waits with them, for a return that might never come, for an ending that might never be written, for the day when beauty finally comes home.